So, thrilling action is important during fight scenes, and one of the things you can do in 2nd edition is you can flavor the somatic and verbal components of the spells that you are casting. That means that you can add some dramatic flair to the spells your enemies are going to use. Let me give you an example. Ka-me! So today, let's talk about the art of pacing in encounter mode in Pathfinder 2e on this episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I am a storyteller and the most long-winded content creator in the YouTube Paizo-verse. Here with a bullet point list containing 9 different things you can do to improve the pacing of your encounters in Pathfinder 2nd edition. Huh, that's weird. Somebody wrote situational irony on my noteboard. Oh well. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder. Today we are continuing my Storytelling in Pathfinder 2e series, and we're going to be continuing our discussion of Encounter Mode, which is one of the 3 modes of play in Pathfinder 2e. Now, in the last few episodes, we have been looking at the modes of play in Pathfinder 2nd edition, Encounter Mode, Exploration Mode, and Downtime Mode, and we've been talking about the storytelling purpose of these different modes of play. And today we're going to be digging into some of the advice that Paizo offers for Encounter Mode play to help make our stories more engaging and memorable at our gaming tables. In this series, we are working through the Game Mastery Guide for Pathfinder 2nd edition, and also a little bit of the content from the Game Mastery section of the core rulebook, to examine some of the advice, the tips, and the tricks that Paizo offers storytellers to help us with our craft. This series is intended for storytellers of any skill level, from beginner to advanced, and even if Pathfinder 2nd edition is not your preferred game, I still invite you to join us for the conversation. I have found as a storyteller that when you study many different games, you can often learn interesting tips or new ways of looking at a situation that you can bring back to your preferred game and help improve your skills when you're playing that particular game. So even if Pathfinder 2e isn't the game for you, there still might be some things that you would find beneficial. So one of the things that we talked about previously in this series is how the 3 different modes of play, Encounter Mode, Exploration Mode, and Downtime Mode, are really a question of pacing in our games. And I'll go ahead and tell you that the question of pacing is actually the core of what we're going to be talking about today. For this conversation, we're going to be looking at pages 10 and 11 of the Game Mastery Guide, where it talks to storytellers specifically about Encounter Mode. Now, one of the things that it notes about Encounter Mode, or fight scenes as we usually think of that particular style of play, is that Encounter Mode is the most rules-heavy mode of play in any storytelling game. It's when you roll the most dice, it's when you have the most modifiers, it's where the outcome of particular actions are the most in question. And balancing the narrative tension of our stories versus the pacing of the encounter is one of those skills that it takes a little time to develop as a storyteller. And in a previous video on the series, one of the things that we said is that encounter mode is when the pacing of the story slows down with the purpose of highlighting and emphasizing the tension of the story. There's a lot to balance here, and Paizo, in examining this particular portion of storytelling, offers us a list of things to focus on. Of all of the details that might be relevant during an encounter, knowing which details are the most important is sometimes a tricky skill, but Paizo gives us some pointers to help us narrow that down. So today, we're going to take a look at Paizo's recommendations on what to focus on during encounter mode, and, well, I've already kind of spoiled what the core of their advice is, but we're going to be talking about pacing. So, let's get started. Should we roll initiative here? So when Paizo starts talking about what to focus on during encounter mode, they start out with a list of 5 bullet point items that they encourage storytellers to really hone in on to help make encounter mode engaging and enjoyable for players. Then they immediately move into a section called Speed of Play and discuss 4 different elements that affect speed of play during encounter mode. Now the 5 bullet points that they discuss are answering questions quickly, building anticipation, thrilling action, making sure that players are aware when it is their turn and when they are on deck, so to speak, and showing the consequences of player actions in play. As for the 4 specific topics covered under Speed of Play, we see a discussion of looking up rules, rewinding, complex roles, and enemy tactics. Between words like quickly, thrilling, rewinding, you can kind of see an emphasis on pacing that is appearing in all 9 of these points, and so we're going to kind of jump through these points, hopefully reasonably quickly, so that we can discuss things that you can do as a storyteller to help your games move faster. Up first is answering questions quickly. So any storyteller who has been behind the Game Master screen for more than 10 minutes, and I'm being generous, can tell you that players are going to come up with some weird stuff really often that you did not plan for. It's just the nature of the game. Crazy off-the-wall plans are some of the best stories that we have in tabletop RPGs, but one of the problems that these crazy off-the-wall plans create is that we as storytellers have to figure out how to rule on those particular situations. And one of the things that Paizo emphasizes here is that when it comes to these spontaneous rulings that you need to make as a storyteller, quicker is often better than precise accuracy. Now, Pathfinder 2nd Edition has a reputation for being a very complex game, and there are definitely a lot of very granular rules available in this system, and in a lot of instances, when your players come up with something, there is probably a rule that covers what your players came up with, or if not covering it directly, there is probably something that can get you very close to whatever it is that your players imagined. Whew! But how do you find it? I mean, even I make fun of Paizo for some questionable editing choices, and finding the exact rule or the close enough rule can be a big ask, especially in the middle of a fight scene where you might spend 5 or 6 minutes looking for a ruling on an action that occupies 5 or 6 seconds in-game. That's not a good balance. It throws off the pacing. And so one of the things that Paizo wants to drive home here is quicker is usually better. And there's a lot of reasons that this is true, but one of the core reasons is this: if you make a bad call as a storyteller and you find out about that later, you can always apologize, let your group know, and say, hey guys, we've learned, so next time this comes up, here's the official rule. And so worrying about perfection or accuracy in the mechanics of a game can lead to a point where it's actually hindering the progress of the game. So as a storyteller, if you're not exactly sure where the rules would be, and you think it might take a long time to find the specific rules that you need, it's okay to make a best guess now so that the game can continue, and just write a note somewhere so you can look that up later. There is another principle that goes into answering questions quickly, and that is what my father used to call the 5 P's of success. Prior planning prevents poor performance. As you grow as a storyteller, you will slowly learn how to better prepare for the sessions that you are running, and mastering the art of preparation for a session can minimize the amount of time that you need to spend answering questions. For example, if I'm running a monster that uses spells, I will look through the spell list that they have, and I'll take note of the spells that I might not use as often, And I'll actually pull those up on Archive of Nethys on my cell phone, and I'll have a few different pages open on my cell phone with the different spells that the monster might use. And if it becomes relevant during the game, I can open my cell phone and immediately have that spell available to me. By the way, I would totally use spell cards for this, but my players are the ones that are usually using the spell cards. The point is, I have a reference immediately available because I know that that is a question that is likely to occur. By the same token, if there's a particular mechanical tactic that the monsters use, I'm going to read up on those rules before the game begins, and I'm probably going to bookmark those rules as well, so that if an ambiguous situation arises, I can turn right to the page that I need. Planning well can minimize the amount of time that you need to answer a question, allowing the pacing of your game to continue relatively uninterrupted. The next thing that Paizo talks about is building anticipation. We've already established that encounter mode is the mode that slows pacing down in order to maximize tension, and so one of the things we want to do as a storyteller is to make sure that we have some element of tension to the actual fight scene. A level 20 party fighting a camp of level 1 kobolds is probably not very tense. But a level 20 party trying to cross a old rope bridge before a tribe of kobolds manages to cut through the ropes, now there's some tension there. You want to build anticipation for how the scene is going to play out, and you want there to be some concern about what is going to happen to help draw your players into the encounter. That element of tension is what makes encounter mode so much fun, so you want to put some thought into how to amplify that tension so that it is hooking your players. Now, to a degree, encounter mode usually is going to have some tension just automatically built into it. You're fighting monsters. Monsters might kill you. Ta-da! Tension. But you can stage the encounters of your game in such a way to heighten or lessen the tension to whatever you need for that particular scene. It's basically a movie trope, but it works for a reason. When you have a group of heroes that are trying to battle their way through a bunch of goons so that they can stop the villain from pressing the big red button on whatever doomsday device it is that he has built for that particular movie. The tension of that scene doesn't actually revolve around the fight because you know that the heroes can beat the goons. The tension of that scene revolves around whether or not the heroes can win the fight fast enough to prevent the villain from achieving his goal. A simpler version that you might be able to use in a fantasy setting is, can the players take down the goons before the villain can reach his weapon? If they take down the goons quickly, the villain is a lot less dangerous, but if they don't take them down in time, suddenly they are up against a prepared and very dangerous foe. Look for ways to build anticipation into your fights so that your players will be drawn into the story. Up next, they talk about thrilling action. And I think the difference between this and the previous point, building anticipation looks at the encounter as a whole, whereas thrilling action looks at the individual movements inside of the encounter. One of the most memorable fight scenes that I have ever seen was a Jackie Chan fight scene where he is fighting on the edge of a skyscraper. And in that entire fight scene, he's throwing punches, throwing kicks, doing all these martial arts moves, and yes, the moves are cool, but the thrilling portion of those moves is the fact that they are occurring inches from plummeting to his death. And each of those moves along the edge of this skyscraper is very thrilling because of the immense danger that is present. Finding ways to make individual moments inside of the encounter into something that is thrilling is important to maintaining the emotional beat of encounter mode. You are certainly building to a climax to whatever the encounter may be, but it is important to find and focus in on those thrilling moments as you build towards the purpose of your encounter. Now, the next thing that Paizo mentions is letting players know when it is their turn and when they are on deck. And this is one of those things where some kind of visual reminder is very helpful to your players. You actually see over my shoulder here something that I do. This is the actual whiteboard that is in my game room at my house, and when I'm running a fight scene, I go ahead and write the initiative order up on the board. Now, it's worth noting I actually have a combat pad as well, and I do keep a lot of notes on this combat pad in addition to what is up on the board. And this is a little bit of an advanced Game Master trick, so I'm not going to go into it too much here, but I'll actually say that the notes that I put on my combat pad are the real notes, and the notes that are up on the board are the notes that my players are aware of. So having two different spots to track information can actually be useful in keeping your players informed while not giving away too much about the encounter. But that's a sidetrack. Whenever I ask my players to roll initiative, I ask them to all roll their initiative and remember their number, and then I'll ask players to bid high. If they think they rolled well, they get to tell me what number they rolled. And I start writing down all of their answers on the board along with the initiative rolls of whatever monsters are in the fight scene. Then, after all the players have given me their numbers, I transfer that information up on the board and they get to see how they compared to the monsters in this particular encounter. Also, one of the things you will note about how I do the initiative up on the board is that a monster that hasn't moved yet is labeled as a series of question marks, and it isn't until the monster goes that my party actually knows which monster in particular is in that spot in the initiative. I have found that a visual reminder like this is a fantastic way of making sure that every player knows exactly when they're supposed to go and is aware of when they are on deck for the next action in a particular scene. Now, I will admit, players being players, I do still have to give verbal reminders too, but a visual reminder is a very powerful tool here. The next topic that Paizo discusses is showing consequences. And the point that they're making here is that when your players act, their actions should have an effect on the world. And that effect needs to show up in more than just the numbers of the game. Saying, you deal 20 damage to the ogre, doesn't feel very impactful. It doesn't show the consequences of what the player has done. Just imagine the difference between you deal 20 points of slashing damage to the ogre versus the ogre clutches at his side where blood is beginning to pour out and growls at you in a guttural language. And even though you do not speak giant, you know he is cursing you. The second description shows the consequences of what the player has done. Now, there are two things I want to say here. First, when you're showing consequences, you need to make sure that you're talking to your players in more than just the numbers of the game. Rolling a 30 against an AC of 20 isn't just a critical hit, but there should be some element to your description that shows that the player's blow has gone above and beyond whatever might be normal for their character. You want them to feel the impact of that critical hit. Now, when it comes to the flair of describing the consequences of your player's actions, there is a lot that you can learn here, and if I'm being honest, probably my favorite example is Matthew Mercer from Critical Role. I love the way he describes the outcome of player actions in his games. And I have learned a lot as a storyteller just listening to the way he describes one of his players landing a hit or performing a particular action. I could go on at length of all the different things he does to highlight a player's actions, but the point is you want to move beyond just the numerical aspects of what the player rolled to describing their action in a way that it impacts the world that they're playing in. And the second tip that I have for you here is the monsters need to react to your players. Assuming that your monsters have a brain, they should be reacting to your players in some fashion that shows the consequences of what your players are doing. If your barbarian lands a critical hit, then it makes sense that some of the monsters should be hesitant to move into melee with such a dangerous opponent. By the same token, if one of the players takes a really bad hit and is low on HP, imagine the dread that you can inflict on your party by having the commander of the monster shout, "They're weak! Get them! Take them down!" Having the monsters, having the villains react to what your players are doing during the encounter is one of the most important ways you can show consequences for what your players are doing, and it's one of the best ways to engage your players in what is happening in the story. Now, moving into the speed of play topics, the first topic up is looking up rules, and admittedly, we already talked about this a little bit in the answering questions quickly section, but there is one more thing that I would like to say here, and that is, if your group can afford it, try to have more than one copy of the core rulebook available so that your players always have quick access to the rules that they need. I actually got lucky. There was a bookstore closing in my hometown, and I was able to pick up 2 extra copies of the core rulebook. So at my gaming table, I actually have 2 copies of the core rulebook, and I set them at opposite ends of the gaming table so that each half of the players in my game has very quick access to the core rulebook, and if they need to know a rule, they can look it up for themselves without having to ask for the copy that I'm using behind my Game Master screen. Now, my situation's a little special because I got my copies at a very heavily discounted price. I know not every group can do that, but even if you can't have an extra copy of the core rulebook, having someone who has access to Archives of Nethys or using tools like the spell cards that Paizo publishes, all of these things can help your players look up the information that they need quickly, and that can help speed up the pace of play. By the way, I'd like to point out a subtle nuance of what I just talked about. Notice that I said the players can totally look up rules. As a game master, you have a lot of stuff going on, and there is no reason that a player who is not active in a particular moment can't be the person that is looking up a particular rule or a particular question. If I'm not entirely certain about something that's going on with player A, it's okay if player B wants to grab a core rulebook and start flipping through it while I might be dealing with some other stuff. Yes, as a game master, you can certainly look up rules, and as I said earlier, definitely bookmark the rules you know you're going to need, but also encourage your players to be part of that process of looking up rules, because multiple people working on the same task can help the pace of play. Next up, Paizo talks about rewinding. And rewinding is any instance inside of encounter mode where you forgot something and now you have the question of, should we go back and change it? Maybe a player forgot some bonus damage, or maybe a player skipped an entire action, or maybe there was some effect that you or a player forgot about during a particular turn. There are a lot of reasons why you might want to rewind, but one of the questions is, should you? Now let me say, the answer to this question is going to vary from table to table, from game to game, from situation to situation. There is no hard, fast rule on rewinding that is going to work in every single circumstance. So, in a way, this is one of those things that you have to figure out the balance for yourself as a storyteller at your own gaming table. But I will tell you the general guidelines that I use. My first guideline is this: if more than 2 creatures have taken a turn since a person made a mistake, missed an action, or otherwise might need to rewind something that happened, I probably will not rewind for that particular fight scene. If someone remembers something that they forgot relatively quickly, like right after their turn is over, usually I'll allow them to go back and do whatever it is. But once 2 or 3 other people, or 2 or 3 other creatures, if you're talking about the Game Master side of the screen, once a couple of other people have gone, if they forgot it, and it's just kind of tough luck. And the reason for that is once too many people have gone, it changes too many variables. When they go back and change an action, that might affect the action of the next person in line, which might affect the action of the next person in line, and if multiple people would end up having to retake their turns, I just usually don't allow it to happen. If you forgot, you forgot. Now that being said, I am more willing to rewind for things that will be simple to implement. If you forgot a damage bonus, I'm more than willing to mark the extra damage on the sheet, the majority of the time. Obviously, don't be waiting multiple rounds to remind me, but if you remember in a reasonable time frame, I'll probably do that. And the other generalization that I use here is, I err more often in the player's favor than I do in my own. Usually, if I forget something, well, the players just got lucky that turn. I had notes, I had the opportunity to plan, so I just look at it as, if I make a mistake, 9 times out of 10, that's just a lucky break for my players. But for my players, I don't want them to feel like they've been cheated out of the opportunity to play the game, so I'm a little bit more forgiving for them than I am for myself. Now again, those are my guidelines. Every table is going to be different, every storyteller is going to have a different balance, and for the other storytellers out there, that's probably a good thing that you could type some comments on down below. Let us know what guidelines you might use when you think about rewinding in your stories. But you do want to think as a storyteller about how you want to manage those situations, because they will come up and you want to have some guidelines in place for how to handle them. Now, the next issue that Paizo discusses is one of those issues that isn't a big deal and yet also kind of is a big deal. And that is complex roles. So here's one of the sneaky problems of TTRPGs in general. Rolling dice takes time, and rolling more dice takes more time. And when you have complex situations that require a lot of dice rolls, those dice rolls can end up eating up a lot of your time at the gaming table. When I did my opinion video on the subject of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, I talked about how the advantage-disadvantage system is both very intuitive, easy to understand, and also, over the course of a long play period, increases the amount of time that it takes to resolve encounters in combat. Rolling twice as many dice for most of the things that you do ends up increasing the length of play. Now, my opinion then received a little pushback, and I understand the pushback that I got, and I fully acknowledge that in the instance of an individual roll, complex rolls are not necessarily that big a deal. Rolling 1 dice versus 2 dice, or rolling 4d6 versus 6d6 is not that big a deal at the end of the day. Complex rolls become an issue with pacing over a long period of time. And so this is one of those topics that it's not the most important topic when it comes to pacing during encounter mode, but it is one of those things that if you can develop good habits in regards to complex rolls, it is going to help you over the long run with the pacing of your encounters. And basically what you want to do here is you want to ask the question, how can I speed up making dice rolls and interpreting dice rolls so that I can keep the pace of the combat moving? Now, there are a bunch of different tricks in this regard that have been discussed in many different areas on the internet, and there are probably a lot of ideas that I'm not even going to mention here. If I'm being honest, the main thing you just want to do is be aware of this issue. If you as a game master, or if your players are aware, oh, I'm going to be rolling extra dice, I need to try to do this quickly, just being aware of the issue usually goes a very long way in helping ensure that the pace of the game doesn't get interrupted too much. But there are other small things that you can do in order to help in this regard. I already hinted at one of them earlier. Let some of the players who are not active at a given moment help with things like looking up rules if you've got other things you need to do, like rolling dice. We talked about looking up rules earlier, and that's one of the reasons that it's good to get in the habit of letting your players help with looking up rules, because they can take on that physical task of opening the rulebook and looking for a particular piece of information while you are handling the task of rolling for the monsters. When you allow players to participate in helping with different parts of the game that normally kind of all fall on the game master, then you don't eat up as much time on those things, and you can sling dice a little faster. You also want to pay attention to the order that you do things when it comes to making rolls. One of the things that they advise in the Game Mastery Guide is get the DC for the roll before any dice are rolled. So for example, if your player says that they're going to cast Fireball on that group of bandits over there, go ahead and ask them what is the DC on their spell, and then while they're rolling the damage for their spell, you can be rolling the saving throws for all of those bandits and determining success, failure, critical success, critical failure, so that when the player finishes adding up the damage, you're ready to apply that damage very quickly. Waiting for the player to finish rolling damage and calculating damage before asking for the DC slows down the game. It's a small thing, and again, in an individual instance, it's not necessarily a big thing, but small habits like that can go a long way. Another thing is, when you can, roll several dice at once. This is probably one of the most powerful time-saving tricks you can ever develop as a gamer. If you know you're going to need to roll several dice in a particular instance, don't roll them separately, go ahead and roll them collectively. If my players throw a fireball at the bandits, and I know I've got 4 bandits that need to make that saving throw against that fireball, then I'm going to throw 4 d20s at once so that I am rolling all of those saving throws at the same time. Now, you will need to have a system for interpreting how the dice land. Mine is pretty simple. I read the dice left to right, top to bottom. So the dice that is farthest to the left is the saving throw result for bandit number 1. And I just continue that left to right, top to bottom pattern all the way through until I have read every single bandit's saving throw. The same is true if I know a creature is going to be making multiple attacks. If I know that they plan to swing their sword twice, I'm going to throw 2 dice. The dice farthest to the left is their first attack, and the dice farthest to the right is their second. The physical action of rolling all the dice together helps save some time. I have seen a lot of game masters, and if I'm being honest, I'm one of them, who likes to have different colored dice sets. Entirely so, I can potentially roll multiple types of dice at the same time. If I have a monster that's going to be attacking twice in a round, I can roll 2 d20s for the different attacks and 2 different damage dice for the damage for those attacks all at the same time, and I just coordinate the colors to see which damage dice lines up with which attack. And it might also serve as a convenient excuse for me to continuously buy new dice. I don't have a problem. The last piece of advice that Paizo offers on complex rolls is to start with the strongest creature or strongest bonus that is relevant in a particular situation and work your way down. So if I have 4 bandits who are making a saving throw against a fireball, I might start by checking the reflex save result of the bandit chief first because their bonus is going to be the highest. Then, as I'm working through the other saving throw results, since those bandits are weaker, it's going to be much more apparent very quickly if those saving throws are way too low. Now, those are a lot of examples, and again, let me stress, individually, these things aren't going to make a huge difference. It might be the difference between 20 seconds to figure out the math versus 30 seconds to figure out the math, and that 10 seconds of difference isn't that big a deal. But over the course of an entire fight scene, over the course of several weeks, over the course of an entire campaign, those seconds add up. So as a game master, if you can develop healthy habits for managing complex roles, it is going to help the pacing of your fight scenes. Now, the final point that they make on speed of play is the subject of enemy tactics. And this is one of those small things that can have a big impact on your group, and it's just, the smarter that the monsters are, the longer it's probably going to take. I know that may seem like an oversimplification, but it's kind of true. An enemy that plays defensively, an enemy that plays intelligently, and actively seeks to mitigate risk at every turn is probably going to take a lot longer to beat than enemies that are charging in wildly, swinging their great axes and screaming at the top of their lungs. So one of the things that you want to think about as a storyteller is how the tactics of your enemies are going to play in to the pace of the story that you are telling. Now, the great thing on this point is it's actually kind of a lever that you can push and pull to adjust what is happening at your table. If you want to drag out a scene, if you want to slow things down and help build tension, play the enemy smart. Make your players work a little bit harder to land the hits that they need to hit or to overcome the challenges that they're facing. By the same token, if you want to speed things up, or if you want to give your players more of a rushed feel to the battle, then play the enemies dumb. Let them make very aggressive, very bold tactical moves that have obvious flaws or obvious gaps to whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. It's a simple storytelling beat, but it is a really powerful tool to remember that villains don't always make the smart move. They don't always play the right card, and they don't always do the best thing in any given circumstance. They're just as prone to emotional manipulation and egotistical fallacy as anybody else. And truth be told, your players probably would enjoy catching one of your villains making one of these overly aggressive moves that puts them at a tactical disadvantage. So be aware that if you want to adjust the speed of the game that you're playing, that you have the option of changing the tactics that your monsters are using. But that's just a quick overview of some of the things that you can do as a storyteller to help with pacing at your gaming table. That was a quick look at the different pieces of advice that Paizo offered to us, but now it's time to turn that conversation over to you. So what advice can you offer to storytellers to help with pacing during their games? Are there tips or tricks that you have found that help to speed up encounters? Or that you can use to slow down and build tension during fight scenes? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, like it and share it. Subscribe to the channel for more conversations about TTRPGs. If you're interested in joining the Disaster Tour Guide community, check out my free Discord group. And you're also welcome to check out my Patreon if you're interested in supporting this channel financially. Those links can be found in the video description. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day. Ha! Well, that was kind of disappointing.